Welcome back. Today's video is going to be the best eyeshadow palette in each category. I came up with kind of different categories like best neutral palette, best colorful palette. You know, some of these are definitely questions that have been in various eyeshadow palette tags over the years. But yeah, I just wanted to come up with different categories, pick my favorite one out of my collection. I own 85 eyeshadow palettes, so that definitely is quite a bit. I had a lot to pick from. And if you want to see more eyeshadow palette related videos, check out my eyeshadow palette playlist. I have done tons of different videos like ranking palettes by brand, talking about the best affordable palettes, all of that. So check that out if you are interested. And I'm filming in this room as a bit of an experiment today. So I'm filming a couple videos playing with the lighting. On camera, it looks like it might be a bit off, so sorry about that. I just wanted to try filming in a different space and seeing how that goes. But yeah, hopefully it's not too bad, and let's get started. Alrighty, the first category is Best Colorful Eyeshadow Palette, and I went with the Glamlite Kaliente palette. I own quite a few colorful palettes, and it was a little bit difficult to decide, but I have been loving this palette. I bought it sometime last year, and I think the colors are so beautiful, and it is mostly what I'm wearing on my eyes today, except for the lighter green is from the Urban Decay Wired palette. But I think this one is beautiful. It has a few neutral shades, but it is mostly quite colorful, and I love the metallics in here. They're so beautiful. The matte shades do take some building, but they are so beautiful, and I love the color story. So yeah, I had to give the award to this one. So for best neutral palettes, I decided to pick one best cool toned and one warm toned. And for cool toned, I have to give this to the Natasha Denona Glam palette. Now, the other cool tone palettes that I really love are the Anastasia Sultry and the Milani Soft and Sultry. I love those palettes too, so it was difficult to decide, but I just love the Natasha Denona eyeshadow palette formula more than I like the other formulas. Probably second place is the Milani palette. I actually prefer that formula even to the ABH one, but Natasha Denona, it's my favorite formula. I do love the Glam palette. I think it is beautiful. I do wish there are a few darker shades because often with the mattes in this palette, I do have to reach into mattes into other palettes, but yeah, definitely my favorite cool tone palette in my collection. Well, for the best warm toned, I had to pick the Natasha Denona Bronze palette. I love this palette so much, and probably warm neutrals are my favorite, and I do feel like they flatter me the best because I have yellow undertones, so it just tends to flatter my skin tone and my eye color, and I have a lot of warm neutrals in my collection, but again, the Natasha Denona formula is so fantastic. And I mean, I have other warm tone palettes from her, like even the gold palette. But the bronze, I love it. I love that in here, these shadows have a lot of red undertones. And I love that. I love reddish type browns. So yeah, best warm tone palette had to be the bronze palette. The next category is Best Palette Under $20. And this was hard too because I have a lot of Juvia's Place palettes that I love. I have an e.l.f. palette that I really like, but BH Avocado Toast. This palette has a beautiful color story. The formula is gorgeous, so smooth, easy to blend the mattes. The shimmers are so sparkly and metallic, very easy to work with, and I love the greens in here, but you get a few more neutral shades too. Such a good palette. So yeah, best under $20, BH Avocado Toast, although it just seems like all the BH palettes that they've come out with in the last couple years are really fantastic. So, I mean, overall, they probably get an award for like best affordable eyeshadow palette brand anyway. Then we have the best mini palette. And for this, I decided to consider ones with 6 eyeshadows or less and also kind of like a smaller packaging. And I tend to really not reach for my mini palettes. I don't know, I just tend to prefer palettes that have like 8 or more eyeshadows because then, I don't know, there's more variety. And a lot of mini palettes do tend to be monochromatic. But the Dose of Colors Marvelous Mauves, I love this palette so much. Beautiful shades. I really like this Dose of Colors matte formula. I have 3 of these 5-pan Dose of Colors palettes, and they are fantastic. I love all of them, but the Marvelous Mauves I have used a lot. I love the shades in here, so I would say this is definitely my favorite mini palette that I own. I did decide to make a different category for best quad. I don't know, to me, there's something that's different about an eyeshadow quad versus a mini eyeshadow palette. In my brain, they're different enough to consider them in different categories, and I went with the Charlotte Tilbury Bella Sophia quad. I love this one so much. I mean, it's very neutral, very simple, but like the topper shade, the sparkle on that is so pretty. I love the warm browns in here. There's not really much for matte shades in this, so I do usually reach into other palettes, but I definitely could do a look with just this. And I actually really like the Charlotte Tilbury eyeshadow formula. I think it's quite nice. This quad in particular, though, I think is fantastic. I do have another one of her quads that I just don't use as much, and I do have one of her full-size palettes as well, but the best quad that I've tried is definitely the Bella Sophia. This next category is for best luxury brand palette. This was difficult because, like I said, I love a lot of Natasha Denona palettes. I love my Pat McGrath palettes, and I also do love my Charlotte Tilbury. And I do have a Tom Ford quad, which I think is quite nice also. So those are kind of the type of brands I consider luxury over high-end because they're even more expensive than like an Anastasia palette. So this was difficult, but we have a two-time winner for the bronze palette by Natasha Denona. I cannot help it. I love this palette so much. It's probably becoming my favorite palette in my entire collection. Like I said, I love the shades and I feel like I can do easy everyday looks with this, or I can go all out and get really intense warm toned looks. The formula on this palette is amazing. I just really, really love it. But I gotta say, I also love my Pat McGrath palettes, and my full-size Charlotte Tilbury palette is also one of my favorites in my collection. So this was difficult, but if I had to pick a best luxury palette, it has to be the bronze. Then we have best travel palette. And I feel like a lot of times when people are reviewing palettes, they're like, oh, this would be great to travel with, blah, 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 blah. Personally, I feel like for traveling, I could use a lot of palettes as long as they aren't too bulky, but I do need to have a palette that kind of has every type of shade that I need. So like a matte brow bone highlight, darker shades for the lower lash line. And for me, it has to be neutral because if I do go on a vacation, I never do extravagant makeup. It's usually very simple and neutral. And so I decided to go with the palette that I have traveled the most with, and that is the Tarte Toasted palette. Another thing I like about this palette is that it has a nice mirror on it so that when I am out of town, you know, a lot of hotels usually only have a mirror in the bathroom, and that can be a little difficult to do. So I don't know. I think the Tarte Toasted has just worked for me. I've taken it a lot of places. It has a matte brow bone highlight for me. It has some darker shades. It's very neutral though. Like I said, I just don't do fancy, you know, colorful makeup when I am traveling. So yeah, this palette has been a lot of places with me and it's definitely my best for travel. Then we have best large palette. And for this, I said 20 eyeshadows or more. And I went with the Urban Decay Born to Run palette because there are a lot of shadows in this palette. However, it's not super bulky, it's not huge packaging, there's a wide variety, there's a few pops of colors, there's a lot of neutrals, there's a pretty good balance of mattes and shimmers. I still love the Born to Run palette and I think it's really good. The formula on it is fantastic. I didn't pick this one for best travel palette because it's slightly bigger than what I would like to take traveling. And also this palette has a very heavy mirror, so the palette does feel quite heavy. But overall, I think this is a really good palette, and I do like that they have a lot of eyeshadows, but they compressed it down so the actual packaging is not bulky, you know, like a Morphe palette, which those are like this big. It's just, it seems ridiculous. I hate when there's a lot of wasted space. So I think the Born to Run palette is really, really good, and it's a good larger palette that you get a lot of variety, but without the massive packaging. All right, two categories left, which are best shimmer palette and best all matte palette. I don't tend to buy a lot of palettes that are all matte or all shimmer, but I do have a few from each category in my collection. But I will say, I prefer a palette that has a bit of a balance of mattes and shimmers. That's my personal preference, but I don't mind combining palettes to get a look. And for best shimmer palette, which I don't actually own that many, Viseart Boheme Dream. I have talked about this palette a lot on my channel in the last couple of months. I love it. This formula by Viseart is fantastic. There's hardly any fallout. Most of these shades are so metallic, I don't even need to use a wet brush. The color story is beautiful. I love this palette. You've got some neutral shades, you've got some colorful shades. It's just an amazing shimmer palette. I love it. The formula, the colors, everything about this palette is absolutely fantastic. And yeah, like I said, I don't own a lot of all shimmer palettes, but this is the one that I do reach for the most in my collection. And the last category, best all matte palette. And again, I don't have a ton of all matte palettes, but I had more than I thought. I think I have like 5 or 6. I went back and forth between 2 for this category, but I decided to go with an Natasha Denona Safari palette. And I know not a lot of people like this palette, but personally, I think it is beautiful. I love this one so much. The other one that I was strongly considering for this category is the Viseart Warm Neutrals palette, which is all matte shades, but I went with the Safari because I just love the color story on there. It's very, very interesting. The Viseart Warm Mattes, it's very basic. I mean, you know, there's a lot of browns in there. It's a great palette and I love that formula. I mean, I think Viseart does an exceptional job at both mattes and shimmers, at least from the 2 palettes that I own. But the color story on the Safari palette, I love the color story. They are so beautiful. That pink and the purple and that bright red. Absolutely amazing. I have no quality issues with this palette. I know some people love it, some people hate it. Those few blues at the top I think are a little harder to blend, but the rest of the palette I have no issues with, and this is absolutely fantastic. Definitely my favorite all matte palette. Alrighty, that is it for this video. I thought this would be fun to do. I really do love all of these palettes, and yeah, let us know what you would pick for these categories. If you want to see other eyeshadow palette related videos, check out my eyeshadow palette playlist because I have a lot of different videos there kind of talking about, you know, the best neutral palettes, best affordable palettes, all of that. So yeah, let us know what you think. That is it. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.